Shalom and welcome to the Middle East Report as we mark International Holocaust Memorial Day that marks the 79th anniversary since the liberation of the Nazi death camp known as Auschwitz-Birkenau. Warm welcome to the programme, and today's special guest is all the way from North London. His name is Marc. He is the Executive Director of the National Holocaust Centre and Museum based in Nottingham. Marc, absolute pleasure to have you on the programme, particularly as we mark International Holocaust Memorial Day.
Hi Simon, thanks for having me.
And Marc, would you just share something about your background? You're Jewish by faith. Say something about your Jewish background, your Jewish family, and growing up in this country.
Well, I'm kind of 5 parts Briton, 5 parts Jew. I'm third or fourth generation English. My family, the original family name was Kawa, K-W-A, which means coffee in Yiddish and Polish. We're from Kalisz in Poland. You know, after pogrom number 799, my forebears came to London, and we've been here ever since. I've always been, proud of the sort of dual identity. I think, I'd like to think anyway, that we're a good example of the Jewish community having its own identity, but also being very proud, actually, to have a British identity too. So, yeah, they're sort of symbiotic, those two parts of me.
Marc, also share with us your incredible career that you've had in business, in marketing and PR, coming up with some of these well-known business slogans that we know, from Tesco's to Stella Artois to HSBC, and how you've come up with these logos, and you've won awards for this as well. So share with us your interesting career in kind of business, particularly in marketing and PR.
Well, my great love is creativity. And I think you have to earn people's attention. So I've always, if you want them to, think about the issue that you want them to think about. So I loved advertising as a way of actually getting the truth over well. I think advertising is truth well told, as opposed to spin. It's not PR. It's getting a story across. And I very much enjoyed being able to move audiences of millions with good stories. That's all it is. It's been, yes, it has been for lots of big businesses, like you say, but it's also been for lots of important causes. Some Jewish, some not. It could be UNICEF, it could be, well, back in the day when it was a very different beast, we did a lot of work with Amnesty International. I'm not quite so sure I would work with them today, given their agenda. But the issue is the same. I think, I've always admired people like Steven Spielberg more than Wim Wenders' art house directors. It's quite easy to be kooky and weird, but to move an audience of hundreds of millions, that's really impressive. And that's what the kind of advertising that I used to do. And I'd like to be able to apply that really to non-commercial issues today.
So share with us a story, how you've gone from an award-winning business creator in terms of advertising to actually becoming the executive director of the National Holocaust Centre Museum up in Nottingham.
Well, I sold my first business around 2009. Although I did then start a new film business with my partner, Malcolm Green, I was very interested in sorry, it's a cliche, giving back. So I became a trustee or an advisor to a variety of charitable organisations, one of which was Bet Shalom, the National Holocaust Museum. I was absolutely blown away when I saw it for the first time. The Smith brothers, who founded it with their mother Marina, were to me almost like, well, I was going to say urban legends, rural legends, because the place is in the middle of nowhere. I couldn't quite believe my eyes, and extraordinarily wonderful people. I was invited to become a trustee. I was absolutely honoured and thrilled to say yes to. That was around 2016, I think. Only 3 or 4 years later, I thought there were some really exciting things that the place was doing, but I wondered whether I could help more do them. There needed to be a bit of change. So I offered my fellow trustees if they'd like me to just pitch up for 3 months in between my film projects. So I did, and then the lockdown came, and now I'm in month 49 of a 3-month assignment.
Incredible. But just show us how different it is to actually be working on something that is so vital to the future survival of the Jewish community, and also really the future survival of Western civilization, because we know what starts with the Jewish people never finishes with the Jewish people. And you know, if there's anything we have to learn from, is to learn the lessons from the past, and particularly as it relates to the Holocaust, to ensure that we don't see another horrendous mass genocide happen again in the future.
Well, emotionally, the biggest difference between thinking about creative solutions to this particular problem to the ones I had in my business life is I'm much more emotional myself about the issue. So you do have to one has to remind oneself of being trying to give best advice to yourself and your team, and not just get carried away with it all. I think the single most important issue is to make it perhaps more clear than it's ever been that this, as you said before, isn't just about the Jewish people, it's about people, full stop. What starts with the Jews doesn't end with the Jews. We've always been the canary in the coal mine. And I do think that's really quite hard for people to understand in the early stages. So if we take the so-called pro-Palestinian freedom marches that have been going on every weekend, if you are living in, I don't know, Derby or Cornwall or Belfast or wherever, you're not Jewish, you think, well, what's that got to do with me? But it is the beginning, if we're not careful, of the slippery slope into de-civilization, a disrespect for truth, a disrespect for common decency, citizenship. And absolutely that is the case, and is felt quite keenly by the Jewish community where it's happening. So how long before it spreads? It's that kind of thing. I don't want to catastrophize, but essentially I think what we're trying to get across are the principles of good citizenship. It sounds very soft, 6 million horrific murders, and I'm talking about something that sounds soft and fluffy like citizenship. But actually, these are the soft tectonic plates upon which culture, society is based. If you don't have shared values, common truths, that's what decency is. That's what community spirit is. And that's what's being eroded. Social media is probably the single biggest cause of it, second by second. But now that it's spilling out into physical manifestations on the street, yeah, it's a worry.
Marc, I do want to, later in the interview, go back to the horrific events of October the 7th and its fallout, particularly as we see the biggest recordings of Jew hatred on record, according to the Community Security Trust in this country, and we're seeing it throughout the Western world as well. And our societies and our governments need to get grips with this quick and very fast. But can you, going back to this beautiful Holocaust Centre up in Nottingham, there's also a museum as well, tell us the story of how it came about through a Christian family actually visiting Yad Vashem in Jerusalem back in 1991.
That's right. They are the most beautiful human beings. I always tell them they're my second favourite family and my favourite when my kids argue. So they were, Dad, Eddie, was a Methodist minister, Mum, Marina, a Sunday school teacher, and he had a tour of duty around the UK in various parishes, came to a little place called Ollerton, and after a few years of being the minister there, wanted to settle down in a nice part of the world in rural North Nottinghamshire, wanted to buy an old place, do it up, and start a Christian retreat centre, ecumenical. So they did, in a place called Laxton, which is just down the road from this place, Ollerton. And they used to do regular Holy Land tours, and I've got beautiful pictures of the boys, Stephen and James, when they're 6 and 8 and 12 and 14, riding a donkey through the Jaffa Gate into Old Jerusalem. Really knew the place quite well. And when Yad Vashem, I think, got rebuilt, they went on a particular trip. I think the boys were then late teens or early 20s, and they came out of the refashioned Yad Vashem, and it was a Damascene moment, as it were. They said to themselves, why is there nowhere at all, as you say, in 1991, like this in the UK? Because there was literally nothing. And secondly, as Christians, whilst they said they couldn't feel guilty because they weren't around at the time it all happened, but it did feel to them like the Holocaust could not have come out of nowhere. Did it not come out of a European-wide civilizational culture, which for 2,000 years was largely driven by, Christian values? So what are our responsibilities as Christians today? And they didn't know the answer to that question. So it wasn't a kind of like, I know, got it. But what it did then produce was, we turned around to mum and dad and said, how about we turn the Christian Retreat Centre, which you've got, into a Holocaust Learning Centre? And mum and dad said, yeah, sure, great idea, no problem. I mean, it's so generous and wonderful. I got tingles down my spine thinking about this. I've told the story so many times. So they did. They didn't want to take a penny of money from the Jewish community. It was, in Marina's words, a gift to the Jewish community. And I think they nearly bankrupted themselves building it. It was in their own farmhouse in Laxton, where there'd previously been pigs and sheep and goats milling about the place because James wanted to be a pig farmer when he grew up. There's a story.
That's not kosher, is it?
Yeah, but good for him, though. They built, landscaped, designed and built beautiful memorial gardens, a memorial hall, an exhibition, without any help, financial help. Lots and lots of help from and advice from people they revered. The chief rabbi of the time, Marina, became very friendly with his wife, who's also a survivor, Lady Jakobowicz. The great and the good of the academic world, people like Geoffrey Wigoder, Robert Wistrich, who I think you knew. So by the time they came to open the place, they were phenomenally well read, but also well conversed, if that's a word, with lots and lots of people. Total humility, not thinking, we how knows to do all this. They put years and years of learning and conversation into this. And the final piece of the jigsaw was Holocaust survivors. Because to them, and it's a great part of the attraction for me and for everybody else, is it wasn't a rational, logical Wikipedia on a wall. I mean, Wikipedia wasn't around then. It wasn't just about the facts. It's about the emotions surrounding the facts.
Yep.
And they wanted to demonstrate friendship. I don't know if you know the Jewish notion of tikkun olam.
Yes.
Healing the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
This was tikkun olam. This was, in their words, they called it trying to heal a broken relationship between Christian and Jew, a 2,000-year-old relationship which fractured almost by definition from the moment that Christianity sort of broke away from Judaism. And I think bit by bit the pedagogy of the place sort of formalized around that. So in the first instance it was befriending Holocaust survivors who didn't know them from Adam. They literally went around knocking on doors. There's an absolutely spectacular Auschwitz survivor called Kitty Hart-Moxon, who's now 96, who loves and adores them. But when they knocked on her door in Birmingham the other day, she said, "You're who? You're what? You're where?" And she said, "Come back when you've opened it. Good luck." And then, of course, she was there on the opening day and couldn't believe her eyes. And so she and hundreds of other Holocaust survivors came to fall in love with these people. And as you probably know, survivors are rightly put on a pedestal by everybody they meet.
They're just incredible people.
But when they're in the presence of Marina and Eddie Smith in particular, the roles are reversed. They revere them for everything they've done. So the friendship, the community, the sense of citizenship that I was talking about before, it's a living, breathing example of that. And that coats all the facts that you learn when you come. And I would argue that velvet glove is more important than the iron fist inside it. You need both, but that velvet glove is so warm, so soft, so utterly charming. You just can't help but fall in love with them. And they're not slick salesmen, they are totally humble, Middle England, if you know what I mean by that kind of people. Very, very great fun, but very humble. And just wanting to kind of figure out the big questions in life. They know there are no easy answers, but at least if you have a genuine bond with the other and de-other them, then you're onto a good thing. And you know, I think when kids come today, well, they pick this up, sometimes by osmosis, sometimes because they're told explicitly, and I think they go away thinking, actually, I know what to go and do. I can do that in my world. You know, if you tell me, how do I avoid a genocide? I don't know, it's a big question, isn't it, if I'm an 11-year-old primary school kid. When you see this citizenship, this beauty, this family in action, you get, well, I can do that, you know. I can. So when a new kid joins my class at the start of a new school year, you know, I know not to become, he's come from Albania or wherever, you know, befriend them, don't other them. So I think the present, the continuous present that we've always lived in that regard, is just as important as the past.
Yeah. Marc, just share with us what a visitor to the National Holocaust Centre and Museum in Nottingham, what would they expect when they've seen it? Sadly, I haven't been, so I'd love to go. I've seen the pictures. I mean, the gardens look incredible.
They're beautiful.
And the house looks incredible as well. It looks like a very kind of peaceful place.
It is.
Yeah.
It is deliberately the opposite of shock and awe. It's not meant to be like the Imperial Museum, the Holocaust Galleries, or Yad Vashem, or the Washington Museum, all of which are, you know, spectacular. This is meant to be, get away from it all. Get away from the hurly-burly of Twitter and the obnoxiousness of Instagram and Facebook, on worse. Come, watch, talk, learn, but above all, think. So there are two permanent exhibitions. One is the, I mean, they designed this in 1991 and opened in 1995, so it's, by today's standards, it's quite old-fashioned. But the 2,000-year story that is the long and inexorable build-up to the Holocaust, it tells all of that story. So it shows, it talks about the blood libel originating in Norwich, in this country. It talks about the spread of anti-Jewish memes, as we would now call them, in culture, popular culture. So Shylock is the most notorious example. Then, of course, have Fagin. There are so many examples which seem like, well, it's just a book, it's just a character. Yeah, but when those things are perpetuated over hundreds of years across billions of eyeballs reading or seeing these things, it reinforces a trope that began with Judas and the 30 pieces of silver, with the crucifixion, with the deliberate demonization by the early church fathers. So what began as religious, Judeophobia, then became ethnic, social, cultural, economic, and then by the time the race science folks and the eugenics folks come along, invented in this country as well, by the way, all of that is hybridized by the Nazis to formulate a final solution to the world's biggest so-called problem. So the exhibition is very, very detailed in the build-up, as well as the facts and the geography of the Holocaust itself. That's the first exhibition. The second was designed by Stephen Smith, the older brother, in response to the question, you know, this stuff is amazing that you do for secondary schools and adults, but what about primary school kids? Now, the conventional wisdom is that you can't teach primary school children about the Holocaust. It's too difficult. And I think that's right when it comes even today to, you know, the death camps and gas chambers. But if you want people to understand the why, not just the what of the Holocaust, then is there not an opportunity to kind of prevent rather than cure, you know, racist perceptions of Jews? So a really imaginative exhibition called The Journey was opened in 2008. It tells the story, you're immersed in the story of a 9-year-old German Jewish boy living in Berlin called Leah. And through a series of room sets, you experience his life. Play with his toys, put on the gramophone player, play on the radio, try on mum and dad's clothes, and you metaphorically follow through a series of room sets his life from happy dual identity German-Jewish kid, to gradually being ostracized in the classroom, to persecution, to Kristallnacht, to then being evacuated as a refugee by his parents on the Kindertransport. And the exhibition ends in this kind of train carriage that's rocking about with Leo saying, what's it going to be like where I'm going to? Will they speak my language? Will they like me? Will I know anybody? So it's not the the end. Like 1945, you get to the end of the war and it's all happily ever after, or in this case, 1939. It gets into questions about refugeeism. What's it like for a Jewish or any refugee to come to a new country without their family? What happened to the people who's left behind? So if you analogize that to today, it's really powerful material for even primary school children to be able to grapple with, because every class has an Afghan or a Syrian or a whoever refugee in it, or Ukrainian, whatever. So they're the two fixed exhibitions, and the last part of it is these sensational memorial gardens. You're free to walk through them anytime you like, but we recommend that you do it having been through the exhibitions, because it's quite heavy, and then you come out and just go decompress a bit. And the utter beauty of it is stunning. So there are 16 or 17 sculptures, beautiful sculptures, but there are 1,000 white roses, each dedicated to people who perished in the Holocaust, named victims, named bequeather. All of our survivor family have planted a rose there. And the individuality of that, it brings it down from 6 million to here's an individual person that was murdered, mourned by an individual, who still loves them and never forgets them. So it's very gentle, but it's very emotional. And the very last part of that is an interactive, experiential piece. I'm slightly smiling because I'm taking the mickey. It's what that was common language. It's actually it's a mound of stones, and it's interactive because in the Jewish tradition, as you probably know, when somebody dies, you place a stone on their grave. This is a children's memorial to honour the 1.5 million children who were murdered in the Holocaust. And you're invited to take a stone from the trough, and that's the interactive part, and lay a stone on the mound. So it's now pretty enormous. I think we're up to about 900,000.
Wow.
So it's enormous. And often, if it's a school group or a Jewish group, actually, they all circle it, having each laid their stone. Arms, if they're Jewish, they'll sing Hatikva, which is incredibly moving, poignant. People might join hands around it and to reflect on, or to talk. Actually, someone might kick off a conversation, and it becomes an extension of the learning experience in a very natural, beautiful way, rather than someone wagging a finger in the classroom.
Amazing.
So they're the core parts of it. There's plenty more.
And this programme goes out a day before International Holocaust Memorial Day. Of course, this day is named after the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest Nazi death camp by the Nazis. And it was the Soviet Red Army who liberated this Nazi death camp, and this is why we have International Holocaust Memorial Day. But what does International Holocaust Memorial Day mean to you, Marc?
It's a deceptively difficult question to answer. The word remembrance is probably more accurate than people think. I think people think it is. It's transformative. Sadly, I don't think it is. I think it is. I think it is a day of remembrance, which, if used correctly, is a jumping-off point for what you do on every other day of the year. People, on the whole, I'm really sorry to say, I don't think learn from history. I think states do. So the national authority of the British government and every other government, honouring this moment in the calendar, I think that is very important, because I think states do have a collective memory and do try to learn. If you look at Germany, for example, today, they are the best Holocaust educators in Europe.
I agree.
For the general public, not so sure. It's an opportunity to virtue signal. It's an opportunity to say yes, but. It's an opportunity to say, and what about? And I honestly think that in this country, Holocaust Memorial Day should really be called Genocide Memorial Day. There is no hierarchy of genocides, but there is, in my strongly held view, a respect that each genocide deserves. And when you lump them all together, I think that's hard to do, because you end up with platitudes like genocide is terrible, never again. It's, you know, what do you do with that? What do you do with a 14-year-old secondary school kid who said, you know, genocide's really bad, hate's really bad, we mustn't hate? Well, if that person, child rather, does hate, they're not going to suddenly say, okay, then you're right, I won't hate anymore. You know, it's a fantasy, it's a wish, it's an objective, it's not a strategy, it's not a story, it certainly ain't a solution. So I think that the day itself is a rallying cry for more substantial education, storytelling, and social improvement.
And your concerns, I've seen this because I used to work in the European Parliament, used to do a programme once a month in the European Parliament, used to call that the European Report, obviously with Brexit, no longer doing that anymore. But the European Parliament would put on an exhibition. Over the last few years, they have taken away the kind of Jewish element of the Holocaust. And Trudy Gold, who's a Holocaust educational specialist and most amazing, remarkable woman, describes this as the de-Judaization of the Holocaust.
Correct.
Is there a great danger that as we see the rise of Jew hatred and wanting to blame Israel for all the evils in the world, that we are in danger of actually taking out the key component part of the Holocaust, which was Hitler's hatred for the Jewish people and Hitler's intention to eradicate the Jewish people worldwide, which was, and if you look at any evil totalitarian ideology, if it's got Jew hatred at its very centre, we know that this is evil, and this not only threatens the Jewish communities, as I said earlier, but also threatens the whole of our civilization.
Yeah, there's a lot to respond to there. As I said before myself, you and I might understand that there has implications for all of us in society, but I don't think that's necessarily that apparent to everybody. Particularly when today the real problem of anti-Jewish racism, and it is racism, and I'd like to expand on that, comes from a completely new place to the Hitlers and even the National Fronts, Column 88s and BNPs of our time, relatively speaking. And that is, it's now a phenomenon of the left. Certainly the far left, and the not so far left, what I would call the illiberal left, because they have a worldview which shares an overlap with the far right, which is Jews are the problem. In their case, though, the problem is capitalism, where Jews are capitalists. Jews, of course, also were blamed for being the socialists and the Bolsheviks and the Marxists, so absolutely everybody has it both ways. And because decolonization and post-colonial guilt is the thing de rigueur today. And so what they've done is take a kind of set of facts, the story of the rebirth of Israel, and put it into a completely different narrative, the narrative of white man colonizing, and wrongly assuming all Jews are white and that all Jews chose to go and colonize this place that they'd never previously been connected with because that's what the white man does. You and I know that the reality is completely different, it has a completely different narrative build-up.
Absolutely.
So it's ignorance. But that is why I think Jews are excluded from the anti-racist imagination. People like Corbyn think that they are, you know, I'm a lifelong anti-racist. Doesn't understand that he will say that, you know, his problem is with Israel, not with Jews. His problem with Israel is because it's Jewish. Because underneath it, as an anti-capitalist, an anti-nihilist actually, essentially, doesn't really stand for anything apart from studenty utopian ideals other than disliking and wanting to pull something down. So that's very different sort of narrative psychology and motivation, set of motivations than the Third Reich. So that's the first thing. do people need to know? I often tell people, I ask people, have you seen the Anne Frank statue outside the British Library in London? And most people say they haven't. And I say, well, it's a statue of Anne Frank, so far so good, but it's to commemorate, inverted commas, all the children who lost their lives in war. She didn't die in war, she was murdered in the Holocaust. Doesn't mention the word Jew or Jewish. And that has been around for 2 or 3 decades. And that epitomizes the virtue signaling on Holocaust Memorial Day and the general desire amongst certain segments of our society to use the Holocaust and Holocaust Memorial Day and everything else as a jumping off point for something else. That is one part of the problem. The other part, I think, is, as you were alluding to, a deliberate removal of Jews from the narrative because they are absolutely unashamedly anti-Jewish racists. So they are the people who say, what about all the gay people, homosexual people, disabled people, mentally ill people, black people, to which we educate, and this is in our exhibitions and our teaching, there were a lot of persecuted minority groups, all of whom have to be remembered. Our definition of the Holocaust, though, is the genocide, the active targeting for systematic extermination of an entire people. That was not the case with homosexuals, that was not the case with black people. There was, up until 1939, a desire on the part of the Third Reich to sterilize and or kill mentally and physically disabled in Germany, but in Germany alone. The Holocaust was in 22 European nations, an entire people with the most brilliant networked industrial solution to the final solution. I do think that we have to remember that there was one other group that was targeted for mass extermination, and that is the Roma people, the Roma and Sinti. But in the end, when Hitler was in that bunker at the end of the war, and he knew that he had lost the war, he diverted all of his resources to his number one objective, finishing off the Jews. That was more important to him than the Axis, than beating the Allies, than certainly than Roma and Sinti. Everything else was, if you like, and I exaggerate to make a point, an opportunity that presented itself. If we kind of set up this machinery to eliminate the Jews, then who else could we pick off? I honestly think it's in that order. So you're right. To ignore that is outrageous. And why do people do it? There's a very brilliant writer in America called Dara Horn, whose first book is called People Love Dead Jews. Because when it's in the past, and you get out, you listen to a Holocaust survivor speak on Holocaust Memorial Day, you get out your hanky and it's a lovely, sweet, elderly person, you're talking about the past. You're talking about people that we didn't know. When you say, so what about today? What about the tropes and the racist assumptions and prejudices and conspiracy theories that you are leveling at the Jewish people, which are exactly the same as was leveled by the Third Reich and the whole of European society then? They don't like it. Proof that they are racists.
And it's also important to note when we're discussing the Holocaust and obviously the Nazis as well, the Nazis couldn't have done that without the collaborators.
That's right.
And one of the kind of missing truths, I think, is the Holocaust, that it took over around 1 million people to help the Nazis murder over 6 million precious Jewish lives on an industrial scale. The collaboration of the occupied nations that the Nazis occupied to help them to do that with the SS is one of the forgotten stories of the Holocaust that needs to be told. And also the sense of there was no justice. What was it like? 6,000 to 7,000 Nazis were prosecuted for war crimes of genocide after the Second World War. And Nazis that were involved in the final solution were then brought back to the government in West Germany in the 1950s. A process of renazification of Germany took place. And all those who were involved never had to pay a price for the greatest crime ever committed in human history. Isn't this a danger that we can excuse ourselves and say, this is all, the Nazis did all this, we don't have any responsibility, let's demonise the Nazis in movies and films, but without taking the responsibility to realise states like Lithuania, the Baltic states, like Poland and other nations, the Ukraine, have their responsibility as well. And where was the active resistance against the Nazis and the final solution?
So there's two big questions there. You know, the build-up, how were the Nazis enabled, and then what happened afterwards. So if I take the first question first, I don't know where you got your figure of a million from. I differ slightly in my figure. I'd say it was 200 million.
Wow.
Because I'm saying that slightly facetiously. It was the entirety of European civilization, mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, brothers and sisters, who, if they didn't say it outwardly, said to themselves inwardly, the Jews kind of had it coming to them. Because of this 2,000-year build-up, the world's biggest known atrocity, certainly single atrocity, the Holocaust, which I think is, was caused by the world's single biggest conspiracy theory, that there are a small bunch of people who live shadowily in our midst, who are out to corrupt us, to subvert Christianity, subvert society, and we will therefore demonize them. That is the cause of the Holocaust. So when I give a talk at a school and say, when did the Holocaust start? And one will say 1933, and one will say 38, and one will say 39, and it depends on this, and depends on Kristallnacht. I say it didn't. It started with the crucifixion. That are the tectonic plates. When I talked before about citizenship, bad citizenship, a desire to scapegoat one particular group and then find brilliant ways to do that. So the most creative, we talked about creativity before, the most creative act in storytelling I ever thought there was okay, so that John Chrysostom, the early church fathers, you know, basically enshrine a set of beliefs about Jews. One of which is the libel of money, you know, Jews and money. So somebody says, I'm imagining a kind of 11th century sitcom or soap opera with an ad agency at the time, gets summoned by the Pope or somebody to say, how can I, Mr. and Mrs. Ad agency, how can I get really reinforce the notion that Jews only care about money? Answer is, we've got this great marketing idea. Don't allow them to do any job except lend money or be involved with money.
Yep.
Don't let them own land, don't let them work the land, don't let them be members of guilds, etc. Well, but it ends up being QED over the course of time. If that's all you're allowed to, then you're allowed to make a living. Yeah, Jews become, you know, not bad with money as a whole. I don't want to generalise. That the banking system absolutely started with that kind of need to, you know, network and loan, because what else are you going to live off? So I thought whoever did that was very clever. And I think, therefore, that by the time you get to the 1930s, it doesn't matter what the short-term problems are, the Treaty of Versailles, you know, hyperinflation in Germany, the desire to turn around and blame somebody. It was only ever going to be the Jews. It was never going to be anybody else. And it never, ever will be. Never. So what do you do about it? You can carp about it. Won't honestly ever change, Simon. It's a question of degrees and holding it in check. I'm an optimistic person by nature, but existentially, ontologically, I think underneath it all, everyone's capable of evil. It's in there. Cancer is in you. I mean, you know that cancer, we all have a cancer gene. It takes a number of factors before it actually gets transmitted. It's the same with evil. It's there. It's a question of keeping it in check and trying to minimize that. So I think it's not, so I'm much more interested in the why of the Holocaust, actually, when it comes down to, than the what. And as you absolutely rightly say, the glossy movie about the gas chambers, or the escape from this, or the escape from that, or all of that stuff, the guys in jackboots, it's morbidly fascinating for audiences, and it always will be. But it actually distances them from the truth, because it isolates the Holocaust from everything else in history, like it was a crazy one-off. And it gives you permission to disengage from it and just treat it as escapist entertainment. So I have a serious problem with the avalanche of Auschwitz this and Auschwitz that books, when they are often badly written, not historically that accurate, but above all, they don't actually viscerally connect to the person's heart, soul, guts, to ask themselves the right questions. So you have to do Holocaust education, if it doesn't connect to what's happening in someone's heart, in someone's community right now, you are, as we say in North London, chop liver. It's a waste of time.
Marc, we've got about 15 minutes of the programme left. I can easily do another hour with you. It's fascinating to talk to you and to get your perspectives on the Holocaust and Jew hatred. But yeah, we are living now, 80 years on from the horrors of the Holocaust. There are very few survivors left telling their story in first-hand account. How do we reach out to the next generation, and how has the horrific events of October the 7th, the mass terrorist attack by Hamas on those beautiful Israeli communities in the south of Israel, changed almost everything? It almost allowed Jew hatred to become acceptable and also allow it to go mainstream.
Well, you mentioned the survivors, so they are probably, as a set of people, amongst the most discombobulated, if not directly affected by the massacres. Because the ones that speak have dedicated decades now to this, are mensches, amazing human beings, and saying, has it all been in vain? So they honestly are, the depression is tangible. My very, very dear friend Janine Weber, she's now 91, survived the Lvov ghetto. She hid under a horse stable for 11 months, feeding off stale onions and bread with 14 other people for 11 months.
Incredible.
Treated terribly after the war when she got back, which it was Ukraine by then. Moved to France, treated terribly there too, and found her way to England, married, settled down happily here. Thought she was in a kind of haven of understanding and gentleness, and in its, the past decade, certainly, it's changed. So people like Janine are horrified and do not know the way forward. So when they work, apart from being friends, when we work professionally together, when a survivor speaks to any of our audiences, it's always as part of a structured learning program. It has been now for donkey's years, where they give their testimony, but it's bookended with the why beforehand, the big picture. The survivor then brings it down to their personal level, and then we talk about the consequences today. That is now much harder to do because A, you don't have more than a couple of hours, say, with a school group, if it's a school group, or a member of the general public. Where do you focus? Everyone is absolutely spellbound by the survivor's story, rightly, because it's powerful stuff.
Absolutely.
But then what do you do with that in your own life today? So what we have been doing is every time there's in 2021 when Hamas struck in such a way that it really started reverberating on the streets here, protest marches then, when my synagogue was graffitied in 2020, when a rabbi got beaten up on his doorstep in Essex, when not a week goes by where in Stamford Hill in North London, the Haredi community, there's always someone being targeted because they're obviously Jewish. We always use news cuttings or tweets or whatever is going on in the culture there and then, and on that day, that week, with the school group, to connect it, to ask them, what do you think is motivating that? Are there any connections with what motivated the Nazis and their accomplices then? And it's a conversation. And being in this beautiful, rural, safe space, and then you can decompress and talk about it in the gardens, we don't try and change people's minds. They change their own minds.
Amazing. So
that's a slightly pat answer, because I'm not saying that, come to Bet Shalom and everything will be great. If anything, we want you to leave with more questions than when you came in, to be less certain of the facts than when you came in, to not be quite so cocky that you think you know it all, and that this group of people are like this and that group of people are like that. Actually, everything's more nuanced than that.
Yeah. I know we know that history goes in cycles, and particularly Jew hatred goes in cycles as well. We're on another huge cycle of Jew hatred, which usually means that will lead to horrendous events, world events, war, breakup of nations, because the Jewish people are God's chosen people. You are the canary in the cage, in the mine to warn the rest of society. God gave your people the Ten Commandments, and we have you to thank for our morality. We have you to thank for our Western civilization. Isn't there a great danger now that when the Nazis carried out the final solution, this was done from government level, from top down? Isn't there a danger now this time is coming up from the grassroots? Through the influence of social media. And that on the whole, governments are, particularly in Europe and Britain, are doing everything they can to push back against this wave of Jew hatred. But this time, it's coming up from the people. Practically, how do we stand against this? Because we know that when the Jewish people are in trouble, we know that our nation is in trouble, our society is in trouble, our civilization is in trouble. We're in great danger. And I think when we're seeing record levels of Jew hatred today, we're in real danger.
I guess there are twin towers of evil. I thought of the phrase twin towers because I think 9/11 probably was the start of World War III, which I think we are in. Because if the first casualty of war is truth, the re-emergence of vile conspiracy theories, totally unfounded in truth, I think in my lifetime began after 9/11. So, social media is now the algorithm is the great dictator. The next genocide of whoever it will be the algorithm who is the dictator of that, marshalling the troops. The troops, however, I really hesitate saying this because it's terrible to actually single out baddies, but I think we're at a stage in society now where we have to. I think that radical Islam, Islamists, not Islam, not Muslims, radical Islamists. The ist is the important part, because they are abusers of a religion, are likely to be certainly the squadron on the front line leading everyone into that war, galvanized by the algorithm, the mistruths that they're being fed. They click once, they'll then get 1,000 more bits of untruth and incivility. So, at what point, I'm going to throw the question back to you, at what point when you see people marching ostensibly in the name of peace in London of a Saturday afternoon, but when you're actually in and amongst it, and I have been, is deeply aggressive, and you begin to understand that actually they couldn't point to where Palestine is reliably on a map. They wouldn't know which river and which sea.
Exactly.
They've been mobilized by something negative, hate, and hate of a specific people. It's not about land in Israel, it's about the Jews, as I know you know this. And the exporting of that ideology around the place, around the globe, I think is a problem. I have to say I do empathize with the belief that the West has kind of got it wrong in recent years. I think the financial collapse of 2008 was a disaster in ways that we even now don't quite understand, because I think it was the end of capitalism in the way that we thought it would be. Francis Fukuyama wrote a book, a very brilliant historian, in the 90s called The End of History, seeming to believe that that the great model of capitalist democracy was the way to go and nothing would ever change ever more. How wrong could he ever be? The arrogance of us as the West to think that is part of the problem. So I understand the Corbynites who rail against the system. I understand the frustrations of non-Jewish, non-Christian faith belief systems, thinking, our almost arrogance of thinking we are the right way. But obviously I disagree with their response to that. So I think my question back to you is, you're not Jewish, but you know that on those marches, they are calling for Jews to be harmed, eradicated. When are your friends, if you go down the pub, when are they going to do something about it? Because until the silent majority can be bothered, then the governments of today, I don't think, have the political will and the mandate to enact the law. The police are terrified to enact the law.
I think it comes out of a moral and spiritual vacuum that we're living in. The fact that our nations and our society have moved so far away from our Judeo-Christian heritage. We are now living in a kind of post-modern era that is valueless because it's got no anchorage to anchor it. And therefore it's like in the times of Judges in the Old Testament. You pick and choose your own morality with the consequences. And people don't know the difference between right and wrong. And then people are being educated, particularly so much indoctrinated by social media that people no longer believe the truth. They've lost their trust in government institutions. I mean, a big cause of this was the Iraq War in 2003. They are more then wanting to know the truth, so therefore they then go deeper into conspiracy theories. And then they pick and choose their own source of information, and they don't back that up or ask questions. And I think this is the danger that we're living in, because it happens in a kind of vacuum, apathy, indifference, and generally people's hearts are growing colder. And this is exactly the same sort of climate that allowed the Holocaust to happen in the start in the 1930s and then into the 1940s. And people don't learn the lessons of history.
We don't need me, Simon. You're bang on. Absolutely right.
And essentially, this is where it is. But also, it's also not recognising the incredible contribution made to the Jewish community, to this country, and to the West. And without the Jewish community, and the Jewish community could and may flee to Israel as a place of safe haven,
well,
the only Jewish state in the world, if things get worse. But I think we also, I mean, to reflect on these things, I don't know how far we can actually push back from this rise of evil now. But what we can do individually is stand up against it. So if we see someone making an anti-Semitic comment in a social setting, pick up on that, confront that, confront people on their prejudice and their attitudes, be proactive. But it also means comforting the Jewish community, telling the truth about Israel's cause, and preparing to think differently in terms of let's go against mainstream culture and society in order to protect our very precious community, which is the Jewish community.
Well, I mean, it's great to hear, and I agree with your assessment by and large. And yes, I think. So I think philosophically, I agree with that. So then, how do you pull that down into action? I'm all about. So what are we going to do to actually change something tomorrow? So for me, because the genie is so far out the bottle, as you've been saying, that I think we need to find a way to empower our civic institutions and our leaders to get a grip.
Absolutely.
And so we formed a racism response unit actually after October the 7th, which is specifically aimed at council leaders, police forces, trade union leaders, university, campus staff, lecturers, management, and school teachers. Firstly, because they are in charge of our civic institutions and are in grave danger of abusing the positions of trust that they hold by failing the rest of us, and I mean all of us. And secondly, because a lot of those places I've mentioned happen to be the natural home of the left, and it's not pretty. But I think if we go in and attack them and criticise them and say you need to mend your ways, I'm not sure that that's a recipe for success. Genuinely, I think a lot of these guys are feeling really helpless and don't know what to do. They do know right from wrong, but don't know how to enact it in material terms. So we have a very practical training course, which is conversational, which shows them a picture of Bibi Netanyahu, of whom I am not a fan. But when you see him caricatured as a child-eating monster, that's the blood libel.
Absolutely.
So I can either tell somebody that, and they go, yeah, whatever, or I can show them the identical image from the front cover of Der Stürmer magazine in 1935. So there you go. So you're a socialist, yeah? You believe in peace, yeah? Yeah? Okay. You're saying and believing exactly the same as the Nazis. And people need to reappraise, and do. It really stops people in their tracks. So there's lots of material like that. We show the visual connections, the origins of anti-Jewish stereotypes. And it's what I said before, it's not about telling people you're wrong, you're stupid, you're bad. It's like, here's the material, let's have a conversation about it. What do you think? And it takes a brave man or woman to go, well, it doesn't change anything for me. If I show people a picture of even Rupert Murdoch pulling the puppet strings, Rupert Murdoch, not Jewish, but it's an anti-Jewish conspiracy theory trope and is recognized as such when you discuss it in these groups with a lefty university academic. So there is hope. There is cause for hope.
There's always hope. Marc, I very much enjoyed our interview, even though it's been a bit dark, but I think we have to deal with the realities that we're dealing with, and we have to mean never again means never again. And I think you've gone a long way to encouraging our viewers to wake up to the reality of the position that the Jewish community face themselves in today with the rise of Jew hatred after October the 7th.
Thank you for having me, Simon.
I definitely want to visit the museum as well.
And roll under the carpet.
I want to thank you for watching this programme today. I think it's imperative as we mark International Holocaust Memorial Day, the 79th anniversary of the liberation of the Nazi death camp Auschwitz, that never again means never again. That means we have to be proactive in confronting Jew hatred. We need to reassure our Jewish community and stand with the one and only Jewish state, there's the nation of Israel. So thank you for watching this week's edition of the Middle East Report.